studying Edexcel IGCSE English Language and keen to scoop up the full 22 marks for question 5, let me show you an outstanding response comparing H is for hawk with an unseen text. Stay tuned to get higher grades. You're watching Schofield on Shakespeare.
Abbiamo il cuore a strisce, portaci dove vuoi.
So this question is out of 22. At the top end, what are we looking for? Varied and comprehensive range of comparisons covering both texts as a whole. You also need some brief analysis of each quotation using subject terminology. Make sure that your response is balanced. You must have a reasonably equal split between the two texts. I think an introduction is important for question 5, whereas there probably isn't time for one in question 4. Sum up the two texts in relation to the question within this introduction and include an initial similarity difference. You should have 4 chunky paragraphs after your introduction. Start each paragraph with a comparative statement, such as, both texts suggest this. This can be reasonably simple, but you should then dissect this similarity by pointing out a way in which the similarity is treated differently within the two texts. Always ensure that you use quotations, short ones, to back up your points, and you need to analyse them briefly. You should also develop or extend your initial similarity mid-paragraph, and once again, back up your points with analysed quotations from both texts. This video is going to explore this question. Compare how the writers present their ideas and perspectives about their experiences. Time for you to have a read through the text if you have not already done this. They will appear at 5-second intervals. Press pause now. Depending on how experienced you are with this question, you might like to draw up a table of quotations showing key differences between the texts and key similarities. Remember that for this question you need a very detailed insight into the text as a whole and in relation to each other, so this process can be really helpful for those of you relatively new to this question. Shortly, I will show you my quotations and my similarities and differences. But if you would like to do this yourself, press pause now. One difference is that Featherhood is set in an urban environment, whereas H is for hawk is set by the sea amidst hills and heather. Another difference is that the baby magpie hardly reacts when peered at in the box, whereas the hawk fights desperately to be released. The magpie in Featherhood is weak and helpless, whereas the hawk in H is for hawk is clearly enormously powerful. The magpie in Featherhood is tiny, whereas the first hawk is enormous. In Featherhood, the narrator is initially not that interested in the magpie. In contrast, the narrator in H is for hawk is enormously excited and keen to enlist the hawk in her battle against grief following the death of her father. Another difference is that Featherhood follows the time period of 2 weeks in which the magpie grows and evolves. In contrast, the extract from H is for hawk spans the space of a few minutes. This means that with the latter, there is only space for initial powerful impressions. We don't know how or whether the relationship between human and bird will develop. Let's now move to some delicious similarities. One similarity is that both birds are not fully free and have to rely on humans, albeit to different extents. The newborn magpie is clearly unwell and so needs Yana's protective wing, pun intended. Meanwhile, the hawk is controlled by her handlers, hence the protective hood over her head to narrow her vision. Both Charlie and Helen grow very fond of their respective birds. With Charlie in Featherhood, it is a slow burner, but he has real pride in the development of the magpie by the end of the text. Similarly, Helen develops such an instinctive bond with the first hawk that she's horrified at the idea of being given a different one. Both birds demonstrate a desire to explore and experience the world beyond their initial boxes. The developing magpie grows and from inside her box scrabbles energetically, making her desire to experience more quite clear. Similarly, the hawk thumps furiously from inside her meticulously packaged box. Both texts feature writers who develop an attachment to their birds and other humans who are more detached and professional. In Featherhood, Yana leaves almost immediately after news of an amazing work opportunity. Meanwhile, in H is for hawk, the hawk agent is focused on appropriate process and ensuring his birds are not harmed. Both texts feature writers being worried by developments following the arrival of these birds. In Featherhood, the writer is worried at the idea of being left alone with the magpie. Similarly, in H is for hawk, Helen is worried by the difference between the two hawks. The second one is just so different, vacant and annoying. And one final similarity for you, dear viewers, subscribers, and not forgetting you, pupils. Both birds grow to become beautiful. In Featherhood, the magpie evolves from dead, smelly, fist-sized fluff to magnificently feathered. In H is for hawk, the hawk's beauty is implied through the description of its precious brilliance. Let's have a look at how you might structure a paragraph. Start with a similarity within a sentence saying both texts. In the second sentence, then probe and dissect that similarity, pointing out different ways in which that similarity is presented within the two texts. Next, turn your attention to text 1, include a quotation and then explain it. Then compare that point with the second text, include a quotation from that text and then analyse that quotation briefly using subject terminology. Mid-paragraph, develop your initial point. Make a topic sentence and then use a quotation from text 1 which backs this up. Then compare that point with a point from the second text. Back up this with a quotation from the second text and then analyse this quotation, once again aiming to use subject terminology. Time now for you to have a go. Write a full question 5 following my tips about how to structure each main paragraph. Remember, short intro, summarising the text in relation to the question, followed by 4 chunky paragraphs. Press pause now.
How did you get on? Time now to compare your response with my 22 out of 22 cracker.
Text 1 relates a touching story of a young man slowly bonding with an abandoned baby magpie. Text 2 tells the story of a bereaved woman who decides to adopt a hawk, but nearly ends up with a crazed creature. The birds are very different in each text, with the baby magpie far more helpless and vulnerable than either of the hawks presented. That said, over time, both narrators develop significant bonds with the birds under their care. Both texts present birds that are dependent on humans to varying levels. However, the dependence on humans is greater in text 1 due to the fact that the bird is in a very poor state of health. The perilous initial state of the baby magpie is seen in the 2 very short, simple sentences. It looks dead, it smells dead. It is unequivocal. Without human intervention, this abandoned magpie will die. However, the situation is different in text 2, as the hawks have been bred in captivity and trained to hunt before returning to their human handlers. Therefore, McDonald's needs to ensure the hawk's hood is tucked over her head. This helps the hawk to be calmer and reduce the amount of external stimuli, something crucial given that she has just been transported to a new environment. Whereas the hawk in text 2 needs to be very carefully trained and restricted, the newborn magpie in text 1 is allowed more freedom. Indeed, as it grows, it appears to assert some dominance over its human companion, insisting that it is picked up and allowed to explore the world of our bedroom. The present participle, insisting, confirms the power dynamics. Gilmore is so keen to nurture the bird that he increasingly follows her instructions. In contrast, once MacDonald and the hawk handler realise that they have taken out the wrong bird, they immediately put her back. It is clear that hawks are far more powerful birds and need to be constrained more systematically in comparison to magpies. Both texts present humans who grow very fond of their respective birds. However, a key difference is that Gilmore's affections develop over time, whilst bereaved daughter MacDonald seems instinctively drawn to the first hawk after just a few moments. Initially in text 1, Gilmore tries his best to ignore the magpie. It is his partner Yana who takes the lead in caring for the helpless creature, whilst he asks, "Is there someone else who can deal with this?" This question and the vagueness of the verb deal show his initial diffidence when presented with the bird. He does not want the hassle of involvement. In contrast, MacDonald is mesmerised. Her heart jumps sideways at the sight of this conjuring trick. This metaphor highlights that she is astonished at the near magical appearance of this magnificent creature from a package. Gilmore in text 1 never demonstrates the same levels of enthusiasm as MacDonald. Nonetheless, he does write in his concluding sentence, "I get the sense that he's looking up to me." Pride shines through this line. Gilmore recognises that he is doing something important and valuable in nurturing the life of this fragile creature. MacDonald's response in text 2 is more complex. However, the number of varied metaphors used when setting eyes on the first hawk show her immediate fascination. For instance, a fallen angel implies that she views the hawk as heavenly, something spiritual, in spite of the fact that it will not be free to endlessly roam high up in the sky, given its status as a bird in captivity, hence the past participle, fallen. Both texts present writers being worried by unexpected developments following the arrival of these birds. In text 1, these worries stem from the writer being abruptly left alone to look after the magpie. In contrast, in text 2, the writer is worried at the prospect of being saddled with a seemingly crazy, idiotic, vastly inferior hawk. In text 1, Yana leaves to take up a fabulous new job in Paris. Gilmore is explicit. I worry that this is not going to go well. His initial reaction is that he is not responsible or alert enough in order to protect this fragile newborn creature. In text 2, MacDonald is also worried about being left alone with the second hawk, but this is because she's fallen in love with the first one and feels the second one is a sort of mad woman in the attack. This amusing pun compares this poor hawk to Mad Bertha Mason from Bronte's Jane Eyre. The implication is that she wouldn't feel safe with this hawk, who could potentially randomly attack her at any time. However, in text 1, there is a sense that Gilmore feels enriched by the parenting role that has been unexpectedly foisted upon him. His life takes on a completely different dimension, which leaves him utterly exhausted before the week is out, but somehow more fulfilled. MacDonald is actively seeking this fulfillment, whereas Gilmore tumbles upon it. Hence her alarm when she realises that she could end up with an unbiddable, unlovable hawk. Slow panic. This dramatic short sentence for effect emphasises just how devastated she feels at the unedifying prospect of attempting the impossible, building a relationship with a blank and crazy creature. Finally, both texts present birds who are wonderfully beautiful and majestic, or become so over time. In text 1, this develops over the course of a fortnight. In text 2, this is immediately apparent. In text 1, although the magpie is initially underwhelming, it develops a cape of black silk and snowy ermine fur. This suggests that the magpie's feathers have become incredibly soft and lush to touch, a significant evolution from a black and white ball of fluff. Whereas the magpie's beauty seems due to its softness and vulnerability, the hawk's beauty stems from its size, power and majesty. For instance, as she's being pulled out of the box, a great flood of sunlight drenches us and everything is brilliance and fury. The imagery seems evocative of the appearance of a beautiful angel, whilst the abstract nouns brilliance and fury suggest the hawk's brightness and vitality, which is combined with anger, presumably at being confined so unnaturally. However, perhaps the writer of text 1 is more interested in the magpie's growth and development, as opposed to its beauty, and the way it appears to trust him so implicitly. I seem to be his tree now. This metaphor confirms that the magpie seeks every opportunity to come and rest on his arms and shoulders. They have developed an intuitive bond. The relationship in text 2 has not yet fully begun. Nonetheless, the desperate way in which the writer appeals to keep the first hawk, a desperate crazy barrage of incoherent appeals, suggests that she may indeed find the solace she is looking for following the death of her father.
Some observations. Make sure your introduction is not too general. Don't give quotations, but do give lively details pertinent to the question. Introduce an initial comparison to give the impression to the marker that you are sharply focused on the task. Remember the principle. Start each main paragraph with a similarity. In the second sentence, explain a difference in how this similarity is presented in the two texts. Note the regularity of the comparisons and the phrases used. Both texts is greater in text 1 due to, however, whereas a hawk in text 2, the newborn magpie in text 1, in contrast. Take real care with your quotation choices. Only quote what you need. Note the ellipses here. Best ellipsis to ignore the magpie. Note how I've combined heart jump sideways and conjuring trick from two separate sentences within one single sentence. Try also to vary how you introduce quotations. You might embed them deliciously, as I do here when I write that Gilmer tries his best to ignore the magpie. You can potentially introduce slightly longer quotations with a colon. Nonetheless, he does write in his concluding sentence colon. And here I actually kick off the main clause with the quotation. A falling angel implies that ensure you consistently demonstrate a detailed understanding of the text. This comes across within this paragraph when I point out that Gilmore feels enriched by the parenting role that has been unexpectedly foisted upon him, and that MacDonald is devastated at the prospect of being saddled with that wretched second hawk.
This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare production, helping you with question 5 of the Edexcel IGCSE English Language, looking at H is for hawk. Many thanks for watching.